All right, hey everybody, this is Rosh, and you are watching FM3 Basics. This is a YouTube tutorial series that I'm putting together to help new and experienced users program all the Fractal products, including the FM3, the XFX3, the FM9, and other Fractal products. So a little about myself. Once again, my name is Rosh, and I live in the Los Angeles area, and I help build and program guitar rigs for a lot of different clients. Some of my clients include Steve Vai, Leppard, Melissa Etheridge, A Perfect Circle, Bush, and more. And I wanted to give back to the Fractal community and share some tips and tricks on how to program all the Fractal products, including the FM3, the FM9, and the XFX3. So this tutorial is actually going to be dealing with bypass modes. So I've been working with a lot of clients remotely and in person lately, and one of the things that definitely a lot of users run into is the confusion between the bypass modes of all the effects blocks. So let's talk about this. So for example, if you go to quick build and let's say have a drive block here. So right now I'm going to bypass that, and I'm going to have, this is just like a generic clean sound. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner of most of the effects blocks in any of the Fractal products, and this can apply to the XFX3 or the FM3 or the FM9, we're going to have these bypass modes. And depending on which effects block you're using, you're going to be presented with some options. So if you click on this drop-down menu, in this case for the drives, we only have mute and through. So for example, what a bypass mode is basically indicating is that when a block is bypassed, and you can bypass a block by either double-clicking it or hitting the space bar, or if you have the block assigned to a button on your foot controller, by bypassing this mode, or by bypassing this block, this mode indicates that what happens to the audio signal. It indicates what's going to happen to the audio signal whenever it's in bypass. So for example, what this means is when you have through set, this block will send audio through this block even when it's bypassed. So for example, your guitar input comes in here, it's going to go into this drive block, and then it's going to go into the amp and the rest of the blocks after. When you bypass this block, that means that audio is still going to be passed through. So for example, I can still play with the block bypassed. Now, when I engage the block, of course, then it's going to give whatever the parameters are here. So in this case, this is the clone, aka the clone pedal. And of course, when it's activated, you have the block or engaged, and of course, it's adding some overdrive or distortion. And now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you're having any audio trouble, any audio dropouts or anything like that, you can't figure out why your preset's not making any sound, you're going to want to go through all your blocks and check that the bypass modes are actually correct. So for example, in this case, this is if I do the mute of the bypass mode, that means that anytime this block is bypassed, it will mute any audio going into it. So as you can see, you could probably hear in the background from my microphone, I'm strumming my guitar, but no audio is being passed through, as opposed to if I do actually put the through, now you have audio passing through. So this is kind of like a basic example of the mute and the through bypass mode. Now, for example, if we instead had a delay block in the front, you're going to be presented with other bypass modes. So for example, you have mute effects in, mute effects out, mute in, mute out, and through. So these are a bunch of different options that usually happen for time-based effects, and this can be a little bit confusing. So again, when the block is bypassed and the bypass mode is in through, that means audio is being passed through this block. So again, I can play it. When I engage the block, you're going to hear some delay. And of course, this can also happen if the delay is anywhere else in the signal path. So this is the delay after the amp. And again, if I bypass it, still have audio, even though there's no delay effect. Now, this is where things get a little bit confusing. So for example, if you use the mute effects in parameter, the mute effects in and the mute effects out parameters are generally going to be used when you have effects running in series like this. So series means that the effects are in a straight line. They're not running parallel to any of your effects in another parallel line like this. So instead, they're running in series. So when you have mute effects in, let me just connect this really quick. When you have mute effects in, what's going to happen is that when the block is engaged, you have your delay as normal. When the block is bypassed, you are passing audio through it. However, when the block is, for example, bypassed, as audio is being passed through, you're going to still have trails from like your delay block. So as you can hear, I'll strum the guitar once. You're going to hear echo repeats. And even if I bypass the delay, you still have the echo repeats after. Let me add a little bit more time and a little bit more feedback so you can hear that there's going to be the echo repeats. So again, the echo still passes through. Now, some users may like this behavior and some users may want something different. So for example, another option is mute effects out. And again, running in series, whether you're before or after the amp block, this is definitely the two recommendations that I would have. And mute effects out basically means that when the block is bypassed, it's going to stop any of the effect from coming out of the delay. So, and again, so I'll strike the delay. You're going to hear the delay repeat. And the minute I bypass the block, there's going to be no more delay repeats. See, it instantly cuts it off. Now, some users may not like this behavior. Some users may even ask, hey, why would I even use this? So for example, if you have a delay sound and then you need to end a song and the song needs to stop at a very sudden kind of stop with no echo repeats, that can happen. Maybe it's the end of the song, you're ringing out the notes and you need it to be dead quiet after that. That's what you would use mute effects out for. Now, where some users run into issues is when they use mute in or mute out. And what happens is mute in or mute out is generally going to be used when you're running time-based effects in parallel. Right now it's in series. And again, if I have the mute in, you'll hear that there's no audio being passed through. And again, if I engage the effect now, you're going to hear the effect. And you're going to hear it repeat. You're going to hear the repeats coming from the effect, but however, there's no audio being passed through here. So this can be problematic for some users, especially if they're using mute in or mute out. And again, they're running in series. So I have some tutorials on running parallel and series effects. I would definitely recommend watching those. But again, running these two bypass modes in series is going to actually kill your audio. And you're only going to notice it when the effect is on. Okay, so I'm going to put this back to mute effects in. And you'll see that sometimes when you add a reverb, an effect that just generally stays on, some users may end up inadvertently going mute in and not have any issues. You can hear the reverb, but the minute you bypass that reverb for whatever reason, it's going to kill your audio. So if you look in the scene manager, for example, and then you have, let's say, your reverb selected, you may inadvertently have a second scene where the reverb's bypassed. So if I go from scene 1, where I'm having audio, and I go to scene 2, where the reverb is bypassed, and again, it's in the mute bypass mode, suddenly I'm without audio again. So this is one thing to definitely keep in mind, that when you're running in series, use either one of these two options, or you can use the through. Now, the difference between using mute effects in and through is kind of user dependent. Again, mute effects in or mute effects out will kill the repeats. So mute effects in, if I play a note, bypass the delay still echoes. However, if you do through, for example, if I play a delay part and I hit through, or I bypass it while the through mode is engaged, then the delay will actually stop as well. So one of the main differences, actually before I address the main differences between using mute effects in and mute out, let's talk about mute out. Same idea, that if you have this effect in series and the effect is on, you're going to be fine. And again, but if the minute this delay gets bypassed, you're going to kill your audio again. So whenever you're running any of these two parameters, mute in or mute out, you definitely want to run them in parallel as such. And the other parameter that you want to do is, of course, you want to set the mix to 100%, and then you're going to use this level parameter to control how much of the effect you want in. So, for example, at 0 dB, the signal of the dry signal to the delay ratio is basically 1:1. Now, as we bring down this level parameter, it is going to basically bring down the level of that effect. You can hear it's way in the background now. It's basically non-existent at that point. Now, when you're running these effects in parallel with the mute out and with the mix at 100%, what's going to happen is if I hit this delay and then bypass it, it's going to stop the effect from occurring once it's bypassed. You hear it instantly kills the effect, but you still have the dry signal without the effect. And then, of course, if you do mute in, what's going to happen is when you bypass the effect, you still get the delay trails. So really useful. Again, in my mind, what I do is I always remember these two are for running in series. In means delay repeats, echo trails, reverb trails, etc. Out means mute effects out is, again, no trails and running in series. Mute in is for parallel time-based effects with trails. Mute out is without trails. And then you have through, which of course is going to mean that audio is being passed through this effect whenever you play. So this comes up to the next thing that a lot of users run into, is that if you're running an effect with the through bypass mode, once the effect is bypassed, what's going to happen is you're going to actually notice that for example, the dB ratio is going to be doubled because you're getting a dry signal here. And then with this bypass, you're also passing signal through here. So effectively, you are doubling up your volume. So as opposed to this, if we put mute in, you'll notice right away, much quieter as opposed to through. So what I'll do is I will bring the preset leveling tool right here into frame, and you can see that, let's see if I can even do that. Nope, actually I can't. So what you're going to see is this output block. You can even just hear it much louder. So again, if you're running things in parallel, always use one of these two rather than the through. Same thing happens if you use mute effects in and mute effects out. If you have the mixes at a percentage that's less than 100%, you're also effectively getting more signal. You can hear that as the mix level goes up and down, you can also hear that it's adding or subtracting level to your audio. So again, running in parallel, just leave it at 100% mix. And then you may avoid some of these issues. But again, running in parallel, you want to use mute in or mute out. All right. So now if you have an effect in series, for example, you do have the option of going mute effects in or through. But you're going to notice some behavior that's a little bit interesting. So with the through, it really ignores this mix knob right here as opposed to mute effects in. You'll notice that, again, starting to run into some issues. The audio is gone, and it's because the mute effects in is also using this mix parameter to adjust how much of the mix of the effect that you want. So for example, if you have a 10% mix right there, that means this effect is also like basically 10% mixed in. So you can hear that right now, because the mix is so high, the dry signal is actually much quieter than the affected signal. So you hear how that delay repeat kind of like gets louder, as opposed to if we do 50%, then it would be a 1-to-1 ratio. If we did 40%, then the dry signal, of course, is going to be louder than the wet signal, which is the delay, and so on and so forth. So some of this behavior you may not want when you're doing mute effects in, especially if you're using high mixes, because again, at 100% mix with mute effects in, all you're going to hear is the delay. Right now, you can hear in the background of my microphone, I'm going to strum the guitar, and all you're going to hear is the echo repeat. You're not going to even hear the dry signal. And then you also run into some behavior issues when the effect is bypassed. So you can see that this mute effects in is also affecting how much of the dry signal you have. So these are the things to keep in mind as you're tweaking and adjusting your effects. You want to make sure that the bypass mode is properly picked. So what are my recommendations? Basically, if I was going to recommend some, rules of thumb, if your mix is going to be higher than 50%, and you're running in series, mute effects in is going to be slightly problematic. So you may want to use the through. However, you're not going to have the repeats if you have to bypass the delay, for example. So it's going to be kind of a trade-off. So again, if you do have to go above 80% and you want like a really wet, delay sound or any of these time-based effects, you're going to run into some problematic issues running it in series. So run it in parallel if you have to use really heavy mixes. And again, once you run in parallel, what you need to do is you need to adjust mute in, set the mix to 100%, and then you can use this level parameter to really adjust how wet you need the effect to be. So, okay, so you're going to have some of the issues like that. Now, if you're running your effects in series like this, and you don't have to go with heavy mixes, let's say you're doing a pretty standard guitar player thing, where you're just going to have a little bit of delay, then running the mute effects in is going to be fine. So again, this is pretty standard. And you notice it's not going to affect your dry signal too much because the mix is pretty low. And again, because you're below 50%. And then what you can do, of course, is just use the mix knob to adjust the level of the effect that you want. And then the other parameters, this is going to be the quote-unquote easiest way to adjust your effects, especially if they're time-based, whether they're in front or behind the amp. Pretty simple. And again, all you have to do is just adjust the mix of what you want, leave the mute effects in, and then you'll still get the echo repeats even if the effect is bypassed as such. Now, if you, of course, don't want any echo repeats, then use mute effects out so that when you bypass the delay, it's going to basically kill the audio from that, but you still have your dry signal. And then you can deal with that. And again, if you're leaving an effect on, like maybe a reverb, like most guitar players will leave just a little bit of reverb on, you still use the mute effects in because your mix isn't going to be too heavy. You're not going to have too much reverb in your mix and things like that. Now, if you're going to be using non-time-based effects, so for example, if you're using overdrives or compressors or anything like that, you definitely want to use just the through, not the mute. Because again, if you use the mute, you're going to kill the audio, which is going to be useless. But you would definitely want to use the through. So one of the last effects that may be missing parameters is the choruses and the flangers. So for example, if we take a chorus and we look at the bypass modes, you're only going to be limited to these two. Because really there's no like echo repeat from a chorus, even though a chorus technically is a very, very short echo. It's a 5 millisecond echo. it's not really going to be that big of a deal. And so with these, again, you can use the through. Without having too much issue. So you have the chorus. Whether it's going in front of the amp or behind the amp, the through is probably going to be fine. If you did use mute effects out, it would also be fine. Whether you're running in front or behind the amp and you're running in series. Now, again, the issue that I addressed earlier is that if your mixes are very high, eventually what's going to happen is all you're going to hear is the chorusing effect, which is going to be dry because it's not mixed against your dry signal. So 100% mix on a chorus is going to be useless. Right now, it sounds like I don't even have the effect on, but what you're hearing is actually the chorusing without any dry signal to quote-unquote warble against. However, if we have something like this, something like this percentage, that means 78% of it is the chorus signal, only 22% of it is the dry signal. And then again, when you bypass this, you're going to run into issues with your dry signal. Much quieter. And as we bring this mix knob down, you'll hear it starts affecting the dry signal. So again, if you're going to be using a chorus or something like that, and your mixes are going to be pretty low, below 50%, it's not going to be too problematic to use either of these, mute effects out or through. If you're running the chorus in parallel, for example, then of course use the mute out function. So we're running this in parallel. We want to use mute out. You want to set the mix to 100% and then use the level parameter to adjust how much of the effect you want. And again, the reason why we use the mute out is so that we're not doubling up our audio path when this effect is bypassed. So for example, you're not going to notice a big jump in volume when there's a bypass, but if we did through, for example, we're going to notice that it's going to get, basically twice as loud. Okay, so again, running in parallel is going to be like that. So other effects similar to the chorus are only going to have, a couple bypass parameters instead of all 4 or 5, like the delay. So if I remember correctly, something like the flanger is going to do the same thing, where we're going to have a through, a mute effects out, and mute out. The same ideas apply. Mute effects out or through in series is totally fine, as long as, again, if it's through, the mix is not going to affect the dry path, as you can see. But of course, mute effects out will affect the dry path depending if you go above 50%. Okay, and of course, running in series, not a problem. And then of course, if you need to run this effect in parallel, same methods apply, that we want to make sure that we're setting this to mute out. The mix is 100%, and you're using the level parameter to adjust how much of the effect you want. And again, avoiding the through because we will end up doubling our output. And of course, if you use mute effects out, make sure that mute effects out is not running in parallel, because then the mix knob is going to also double up in your volume. So you can hear that even when the effect is bypassed, you're actually affecting the dry signal, because again, you're passing audio through this effect. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for this tutorial. I hope it's useful. If you guys need any help, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. I do one-on-one consults and sessions with users worldwide. Would be happy to help you out program all your Fractal products, including the FM3, the FM9, and the XFX3. So other than that, this is going to be it for me. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.
I'm falling with you, I'm standing with you, got it all in my head.